This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Canada Reads American Style. This is Tara, and today I have a very special guest with me today. I'm going to do a little introduction before I say hello to her. Hollay Ghadery is an award-winning Iranian-Canadian multi-genre writer living in rural Ontario on Anishanaabe land. Fuse, her acclaimed memoir of mixed race identity and mental illness, was published by Guernica Editions Microland imprint in 2021 and won the 2023 Canadian Bookclub Award for nonfiction / memoir. Little heads up, you can go back in the past to our January 11th, 2023 episode in which Rebecca interviewed Hollay for that memoir. Her debut collection of poetry, Rebellion Box, was released with Radiant Press in April 2023. Hollay's short fiction collection, Widow Fantasies, will be released on September 1st. We're just days away from that release with Gordon Hill Press. And if that wasn't enough, Hollay is also the poet laureate of Scugog Township, as well as the founder of and senior publicist at River Street Writing, a team of creatives who aim to produce and celebrate amazing writers. Welcome, Hollay.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to speak to you today because Rebecca had her chance last year and now it's my chance. So let's start off with your newest book, which is coming out on September 1st, Widow Fantasies. In each of the stories, your characters are extremely well developed, but this is short fiction, flash fiction, so not just short stories, right? So how do you, as a writer, develop characters while working within the confines of short fiction?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I really have a wonderful answer for it. It's a lot of these things are just a lot of stories take impetus from my life, so they're kind of just like extensions of me or experiences I've had or people I know. And then when I'm working with short fiction, and in this case, really short fiction, I think somebody pointed it out in a recent review, and I'd never noticed it before. There's like 2.5 pages is kind of the max.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I don't think I'd ever really paid that much attention to the length, but I think I try to focus not on like fleshing out an entire character, but just developing one thing about them that can help a reader understand this one point of their lives, but also more broadly, maybe who they might be in other situations. I read a wonderful book called Brevity by David Groff, and it's a book on writing flash fiction, and that really like very practical exercises, and it really helped me just keep my eye on the prize and keep focused, and realizing that flash fiction's not going to be for everybody. And I don't even want to call it flash because some are longer than flash. It's kind of this a lot of them are this in between state. I think what these short stories do is it really challenges people's expectations from narrative. And more specifically, I was trying to challenge people's expectations for narratives that come from women and the way that people often, and even readers, expect women's narratives to flow. And it wasn't anything I was doing consciously at first, but it's something that I was aware of when readers or editors asked, or were not pushing back, nobody pushed back, but when readers engaged with the work, why was I choosing and to do certain things? Why was I making these decisions? And it was kind of because this is my life and I want to, and this is the way I see the world, and I don't want anyone telling me that it's not valid because it doesn't follow a certain narrative arc that you expect from me.
Yeah, I actually really like that because I've come. I'll full disclosure. I'm 53.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just only recently started going, you know what? If I don't want to, I've come to realize that in media, there's this pressure for us that we're supposed to watch certain shows because
Mm-hmm.
they're classics and we're supposed to read certain books. There are expectations of us to consume certain media. And I've come to realize that often that media is from a male perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I've come to the point that I'm like, I'm almost refusing to consume some of that media because I don't like to be told. And I'm finally getting the nerve up to refuse that. So I love what you just said about how you're just going to tell the stories how you want to.
Yeah, and I'm really aware of the fact. I mean, I was just saying to my partner the other night, is more than any other book I've written, I'm prepared for people just to be like, I'm not going to say not like the book, but to have to struggle with it. And I didn't write this to make people struggle. I don't believe in writing books that make readers work for it. Like, I think reading should be, it can cause reflection. It can cause you to feel unsettled. But like the actual writing itself should not like feel like you're slogging through some essay on metaphysics and epistemology, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want that for people. That was never my intention. But I'm not trying to give people comfortable narratives. If they feel like they're being pulled out of a story, fine. That's what it's like to be a woman with 4 young children. You're constantly pulled out of your life. You're constantly feeling disrupted. You're constantly feeling unsettled. You're constantly feeling joy and fear and all of these things. And because your life is always interrupted, and there's these fragments of life and fantasy, and I mean, that's what I was just trying to. I was replicating that. So, but I am prepared for people to be like, to have these responses of being like, oh, well, I didn't feel like I got to know this character enough. Welcome to my life. I don't get a coherent thought. Like, that's what the form is reflecting the content. And I expect that to challenge people who are expecting a certain narrative. The point of this book is not to give people full narratives of these women's lives. It's not the point.
Yeah. I would tell anyone who says that to you that you can send them to me because you may not, you may not give the full narrative. Like I may not know the whole story, but I know that person in your story. Do you know what I mean? Like at that very moment in their life, they are fully fleshed out in your stories.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I do have to thank amazing editors and beta readers for kind of pushing me. Sometimes it wasn't always that way. The poet in me is like, nope, less words, less words, less words. I had one editor tell me, not for this project, but for a novel I have coming out in 2026. She was like, I've never had to say this to anyone before, but less showing, more telling. You can just tell us something now and then, Holly. I'm like, I can. I don't know. I don't know. I'm so used to showing everything. So I really do appreciate that. It's not. I'm not trying to say like all this came naturally to me. Flash fiction is a very precise form, and I keep calling it flash, but again, it's not even strictly flash. It's just kind of length I've not made up because it varies in lengths, but it's just the story ended wherever I thought the story should end. And if people want to shove that into a little box and call it this or that, that's their business. They're just short stories. That's what I call them.
I like the term. I've always been referring to it as flash fiction, but I saw, I think, on your website the term short fiction. And I really liked that actually too, because it wasn't short stories, it was short fiction.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, put it in any label you want. Give it any label that makes you as a reader feel comfortable, or not you, but any reader feel comfortable. I'm kind of over labels at this point in my life. I feel very woo woo saying that sometimes, but I'm mixed race or biracial. I'm queer, but I'm in a heteronormative relationship. I'm neurodivergent, but I'm managing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I always just feel like I'm not enough of anything to be anything. So when anyone's trying to like slap labels, I'm automatically like, ugh.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of this book, not whole point. Part of the point of this book is, we as people, as women, we contain multitudes. And I think that labeling things can be helpful sometimes, especially if you're just kind of trying to figure out who you are. These labels can be super helpful, but they're like training wheels. But for me personally, I wanted those training wheels off after a while. And I was fine not having anything hold me back or define me, because I want room to grow. And part of it's like wanting room to grow past mistakes. Like I'd hate to be labeled as who I was or what I was doing in my 20s, right? Like I'd be like, oh, no. I need to move past that, because that wasn't my most, a lot of my moments in my 20s were my proudest moments.
But they've gotten you to this point.
Yes,
So,
I try to remember that.
Yeah.
If I hadn't done all that, I wouldn't be where I am. And, not that I'm in this joyous state of euphoria over my life at all points, but, I love my babies. I have a wonderful, supportive partner. I love my goats and my chickens and my dogs. I just realized I said I love everything except my partner. I love him. So, yeah, I can't complain.
Awesome. Now, having said that you can't complain, there is a thread of female rage through a
Yeah.
lot of these stories.
Yes.
And I love it. I love female rage. So give me some thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, I think so many people have spoken very articulately about female rage, and I would argue that anyone could speak more articulately about almost anything than I can. My thoughts are very disjointed and jumpy, and on the best days. But for me, it's this. I mean, I grew up specifically. I was raised as Islamic, and especially as I grew into adolescence, like approached teenagehood, I really felt like I was never listened to. There was this expectation of who I should be and not who I was. And things as simple as the dress I wanted to wear for grade 8 graduation, not being able to wear it after my mother and I bought it because my father didn't like it. And it seems like such a small thing, but I remember, you know, just not understanding why, my mom who bought it with me wouldn't stand up for me. And how do we all feel so powerless to this one person? And just feeling trapped in the systems that controlled my life and completely impotent to do anything about it because I was just a kid. And yeah, as growing up, you may have more control over certain aspects of your life, but there's this idea of just not ever feeling in control. Even like when I book a flight somewhere, if I'm traveling alone, I don't want to arrive in a strange city in the middle of the night because I don't like the world is just such a threatening place to women. And that doesn't make me, I mean, that does scare me, but it also just makes me so angry all the time that I have to live this way and that, you know, my kids have to live this way. Even my husband recently told my daughter when she was, worrying about something. She's like, you're 12 years old. What do you have to worry about?" She goes, "I'm a 12-year-old girl. I have everything to worry about." And that's how I feel. It's like I'm so angry that we have to feel this way all the time. So that anger did filter into these stories, and I think anger is a very healthy expression sometimes, and we're allowed to express it without feeling like we're quote hysterical women.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to take a little tangent, slightly just talk about short fiction. It's only come onto my radar in the last maybe 2 years through yourself, this book, and Finian Burnett. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their book, Price of Cookies.
Mhm.
And there's Barbara Black was actually probably my first flash fiction writer. Is there a renaissance in short fiction, or have I just been like oblivious to it my entire reading life?
I don't know if there's a renaissance because I've always read short fiction. I mean, I do notice other people being more open to it, which is lovely. But I've always loved short stories. So for me, I'm not really. And I'm also noticing more people are open to it because of what I do for work. So working in book publicity and trying to get someone to like pay attention to a collection of short stories is a lot harder than trying to get someone to pay attention to a deeply personal memoir or a novel. The hardest thing to get anyone to pay attention to is poetry, but short stories are kind of just after poetry for difficulty level. But people are being more open to it. But again, I think the resistance to is again these narrative expectations that we have that are like any artistic expectation. It's like when someone looks at a piece of abstract art and is like, "I don't get it," and dismisses it and walks away instead of looking at it and understanding that any kind of art, whether it's a book or a play or a painting, it's a mirror to who we are, and it tells us something. Our reaction to it tells us something about who we are and our feelings and our beliefs and our biases and prejudices about the world. And I think sometimes when you have short fiction, people they want this like well, no, I'm used to this narrative arc and this sense of closure and this wrap up and this breadth. And short fiction, especially short fiction like mine, denies them that and asks them to live without it and to see what that says about who they are and maybe their expectations for life in general. And I think it's unsettling because it's so revealing, but people don't really want to sit with those uncomfortable feelings. And not everybody, a lot of people don't want to sit with those feelings and do the work and say, hey, what does this say about me? Maybe the art isn't the problem. Maybe maybe I'm the problem.
Do you have to exercise a different writing muscle when you're writing short fiction versus poetry versus memoir?
Yeah, definitely. With memoir, people usually want more, more, more. And with flash fiction, and no matter what, I'm cutting out a lot. I'm a rambler. Like I always say to people, if you want like a straight answer from me, ask me to write it down. Don't ask me to speak it because my brain is moving 10 times faster than my mouth. And I mean, this is me medicated, so my brain is slowed down. But it's very difficult for me. But yes, I mean, it is slightly different. It's just a lot more controlled than a memoir. You're giving information, and every bit of information in this, like, the brevity of these stories has to be relevant somehow. I'd argue that in anything, the information you're giving has to be relevant. But sometimes, you open a novel and it's like, you're suddenly in 5 pages of, describing a communication system. And I'm very specifically talking about Michael Crichton in Congo right now. I'm like, I don't care, Michael. It could have been 3 sentences. But, I think about stuff like that, and it seems like in longer forms, they'll forgive you for rambling a bit. Whereas you really have to be concise with short fiction, but the same goes for poetry. The differences with poetry is that not everything has to make narrative sense. With poetry, there can be a kind of non sequitur logic to everything. So yeah, it's different muscles, but I find it very fun to play. It's just playing in a sandbox of different form, and uh, I like that.
I can see your poet mind in your short fiction, because the story I read this morning, I think, was called Pith. And
Okay,
you
yeah.
just, and in every story, but this is the one, my most recent one that I read, you just have these beautiful little images. And this story in particular was two women sitting outside a hospital on a bench during their break. And one of them is peeling an orange. And it's like, I can see Hollay the poet while I'm reading Hollay the short fiction writer's work. And it's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've everything starts with poetry for me, and it either changes into something else or it doesn't change into something else. So, that particular book was just being at or story was just about, kind of started with being at a hospital and my small little community, and watching a woman with this, like, kind of purple rinse in her hair walking across a crosswalk, and she looked like a fiddlehead or a question mark, because her spine was so pulled over. And then at the same time, I was doing an exercise in David Groff's Brevity, where it was talking about mastering the art of the twist ending in a very short, like, it's like a mystery novel where there's this twist at the end, but you're doing it in such a short period of time. So I was trying to think about how that could happen. And then I was reading a book later that night, and somebody's gym card fell out. Somebody's old, it was a secondhand book. I guess somebody had used it as a bookmarker, and their gym card fell out. And then it kind of all came together. So
Okay, that's very cool. I love that insight. I don't want to spoil then the twist
no,
ending for this
no,
story, so let people pick up the book, read it. But thank you for that insight.
oh, no
That's
problem.
very cool. I love that. Okay, let's move on to another aspect of your writing life, and that is River Street Writing. Why don't you tell us about River Street Writing and its mission?
Yeah, so River Street's mission is to celebrate the work of mostly small presses and small press authors in Canada. I feel like Canadian authors, or Canadian art in general, whether be film or literature or anything, it's often like we're almost self-depreciating about it, like, or deprecating about it, like it's like we see it as like second rate to what's put out in the States or somewhere else. And I think that Canadian literature is just as good, in some cases not better, and especially the stuff particular coming out of small presses. I mean, if I think of all my favorite books, a top 10 list. I mean, my top 10 list changes constantly depending on where I am in my life and how I'm feeling. But if I take, like, the top of the top that usually are consistently on that list, They're mostly small presses that have released these books, and I really felt like I wanted to spotlight this more and get more people to pay attention to these books and understand how incredible they are. And it kind of aligns with my feelings about being a conscious consumer on this planet right now, about not just um, blindly buying what's constantly put in front of us, because there's certain companies that can afford to market at you all the time, but to stay curious and to go out there and find what brings you joy, and just not to accept what's presented with you blindly all the time, because I find the things that bring me joy are often the things I discover myself, or discover with a little bit of introspection and thought. And I'm trying to put other books in front of people and say, like, hey, these are really good too. Please just pay attention to them. And when you walk into a bookstore, be aware of the fact that what's placed in front of you, for the most part, indie bookstores do their part and do champion books without sale spaces. But in the big bookstores, what you see in front of you has been paid to put there. Like the publisher has paid to put this there in these prime spots. And, it doesn't necessarily mean the book is better than any other book. I'm not saying that the books aren't good. I mean, there is wonderful literature coming out of big presses too. I'm not poo-pooing them, but there's really great literature coming out of these small presses. And it's that kind of like the same kind of channel that fuels my feminine rage. Femin's like this kind of rage where I'm like, please pay attention to this literature. Like it's what I do for a living, but it's also such a passion project. And I have to watch out because I can be up till midnight doing things because there's a book that I'm representing that I just so desperately want people to pay attention to. And I don't feel like it's getting the attention it deserves because everybody's inundated. Everybody's busy. I get that. But I want people to kind of re-enchant themselves with the magic of books and re-enchant themselves with the world. Like, go and roll around in the grass, then come in and read a book that you just picked willy-nilly off a shelf, or that somebody that you've seen and you think, wow, I'm sure maybe not everyone's talking about this book on Bookstagram, but like, I think it might be really cool to read, and it sounds good, and maybe I'll just like let myself be the judge and I don't have to blindly accept what other people tell me to read. So I mean, I'm guilty of blindly accepting sometimes and falling into trends too. I get it. But I think that we need to interrogate that impulse in ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. 2 follow-up questions.
Mm.
One, you can't tell us that you have like a top 10, and I know that it changes all the time. Mine does too. But you said that there are some that are consistently on the top of your top 10.
Mm-hmm.
Care to share those with us?
Yeah. So there's a wonderful book by Eva Famari. That is a pen name. I don't know who the author's real name is. She's an Iranian author who uses a pen name, presumably, I think, for political reasons. And she wrote a book published by Guernica Editions, I believe in 2017, called Through the Sad Woods Our Corpses Will Hang. And it is just punching you in the gut, slap you in the face, then kiss you on the lips gorgeous. Like, it's just, I read this and I've read it like 4 times since that. And it's about a woman who is accused of murdering her mother. And the all of the story is surrounding her, and she's this not very reliable narrative, and you wonder if she's maybe if she has a mental illness, but should that undercut her narratives? And the way that she tells the story is, it's just so enchanting and raw, and I don't want to give anything away, so I really think people should read it. And then I love Daphne du Maurier, so that's about as commercial as I get. um, her, like, Frenchman's Creek, I still remember reading that book for the first time, where I was. Like, I don't remember much about like a lot of firsts in my life, but I remember exactly how it felt to sit down and read Daphne du Maurier's Frenchman's Creek. Just one of the most gorgeous books ever. Chinua Achebe's Ant Hills of the Savannah, Babsi Sidwa's Cracking India. Love those books. I really enjoyed Jared Edson's The Boulevard, which is something I was only introduced to last year, and by the newly established Galleon Press out in the east coast of Canada. Lee Thompson established it, and blow your mind good about it's about Hemingway and Satan on a train ride through hell to go talk to Van Gogh, who has painted the boulevard of the underworld in the image of heaven. And God's coming down, and the devil's really like, oop, God's going to be pissed. So they're trying to do something about it. And it's this really wonderful story that I probably didn't do justice right there. Of course, poetry. I love the work of Brahmin Wallace. I just finished reading Most of All the Wanting by Amanda Murpaugh, which is up there on my top poetry list. That's a wonderful book about life after divorce and queer love and desire and joy and longing. Oh my gosh, there's just so much. I love George Eliot Clark's work. I love Dwyla Falls. That's a wonderful book of poetry. And one that's creeped in there fairly recently is David Margoshes' A Simple Carpenter, which is published by Radiant Press. So it's a great award-winning little press on the prairies. And it's about a guy who wakes up on a boat and can't remember anything about himself and how he got there, but he can speak every language that's spoken to him. He can understand everything and perform a whole bunch of really skilled, complex tasks. He thinks he's just lucky, but everyone else begins to think he's the Messiah. So it's a really thrilling, wonderful work of magic realism. And yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but that list will change. And anything by Adele Wiseman. Sorry, I have to add Adele. She's amazing.
Okay, that's a fantastic list. Thank you.
No problem.
I read Jared Edson's The Boulevard earlier this year as well, on your advice. I believe you hooked me up with it.
Yes.
And I can't remember the date of it, but I did interview him as well. So anyone who's listening, if you're interested, go back and read it, because I also loved that book. It was fantastic.
Isn't that just a wonderful example of these insanely bananas good books that are out there that not enough people are talking about? Like, how is everyone not talking about this book? And it's because Galleon's a new press. And even though Jared's published, I think it's like 5 other books, he doesn't have the marketing might of these massive presses behind him. And I mean, I'm not going to say he's in obscurity. I know he's going to be at Word on the Street this fall in Toronto. He's been invited there. Like, I know he's had good things happen for him, but more people need to read this book. Like, it makes me want to cry when I think about how many people are missing this. Like, it's like, and then you see them talk about these other books. And I don't believe there's such thing as like, I'm happy anyone's reading. I don't care if they're reading the back of a cereal box. You know, I don't care. I'm happy when people read. But, you know, there'll be these huge conversations about these other books. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But those aren't the only books out there. Check this out. Your mind will be blown. And trying to get anyone to pay attention to is like screaming into the void someday. But I have a lot of rage. So I have a lot of energy to scream.
That's okay. And we're providing you a void right now. So this is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, my second follow-up question, and so that was your like favorites. What are the books right now that you want to like scream into the void and have people read?
Well, definitely The Boulevard. Definitely A Simple Carpenter. I'm going to try like Chinua Achebe and Babsi Sidwa. Amazing people, amazing books. But I feel like, you know, they're already in the canon. So I'll back off ones like that. My gosh, there's so many. I'm trying to think of ones that I just finished reading. I read Pamela Malloy's Off the Track, which is a collection of essays about train travel, kind of a little bit during the pandemic, but she wrote this during the pandemic when she couldn't travel on trains. And it's a really interesting kind of meandering, engaging story about many things, but mostly about the joy of slowing down and being more conscious of what's around us. So obviously that really aligns with who I am and what I'm aiming for in my life. That is a wonderful book that I think everyone should absolutely read. There's oh my gosh, everything by Radiant Press and Walsack and Wynne and Latitude 46. I mean, these are 3 small presses in Canada that every single book they put out, I'm like, oh my God, like, how are these not on every award list? How are these not flying off the shelves? Like, the editorial direction of these presses it's very different. You know, Latitude 46 is looking at writers from Northern Ontario specifically. They do some great historical fiction, for instance, really wonderful poetry, but there's this really wonderful feeling of just being rooted in the world in these books. So, and then, you know, Radiant Press is doing some fascinating things with like speculative fiction and even fantasy and melding genre. They also have great poets and, you know, short story collections. So them, and then Walsack and Wynne has, you know, very outward looking nonfiction. like it's not going to be like a memoir like the one I wrote about mixed race mental illness, but nonfiction that looks out at the world. So really wonderful. And then fabulous poetry in really just boundary breaking fiction. And, if I think of, I'm getting my names mixed up, Ben Berman-Gaughan's book, The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits, that was just published just this year by them. It's just incredible. So, and it's like sci-fi, horror, literary fiction, like that spans the course of centuries of this book. Like, talk about my short fiction just taking really short time, and this one's like spanning millennia. The time frame of this book, it's just incredible. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't very helpful with specific books, but the publishers I'd like to shout out in general.
Yeah, no, they all deserve a shout out. It's true. You've hooked me up with books from all three, and Woolsack and Wynne has become one of my favorite too. If I go and look at their catalog, I'm just like that. They all sound amazing, and
Yeah.
they are extremely local to me. Like, kind of, I drive by their little office sometimes, and so yeah.
And I think that we just have to stop thinking that. I mean, I feel like I'm repeating myself about what I say about being the poet laureate of a largely rural community. We have to stop thinking that art and talent exists as somewhere outside of us, like that's it's somewhere in some big metropolis, or it has to be in New York, Paris, LA. I don't, or at least Toronto.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing art, and artists are like right here in our communities, in Hamilton. Like, it's right here. We have to stop looking elsewhere for amazing art and artists. It's right here. And I think I love what the Woolsack and Wynne editor Paul Vermeesh said in a CBC interview on Commotion, which is, we value what we celebrate. Now, it'd be wonderful if we celebrated what we valued, but that's actually not what happens. It's only once people get on board with celebrating something and there's some noise and trendiness around it that we'll actually start to value it. And River Street's mission is to be like, okay, well, if that's the way we have to play, then let's start celebrating it, and then maybe people will start valuing it because it's already valuable, but people aren't seeing the value in it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect for your mission. I love that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple more book recommendations. What are you currently reading, or like most recently read?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm on a jury for a few awards right now. So I've been reading a lot of submissions for that, and I can't talk about it. So, but I will say Saskatchewan's got some wonderful poets. And for what else did I just finish reading? Oh, I just jumped into Woolsack and Wynne, the first book in Peter Derbyshire The Cross series. It's called The Mona Lisa Sacrifice. And the Cross series is really fascinating, even about how it's being republished. This is a reissue because the series was originally published by a press that is now defunct, and it's now kind of been resurrected by Woolsack and Wynne, who is also resurrecting their popular press imprint, which is kind of like more speculative work. And the series follows this guy who can't die, and he keeps being resurrected as well. And it's like a lost soul who was born into the body of Christ when Christ woke up in the cave. And it's just thrilling and fascinating, and I'm so addicted to it. I was awake till 4:00 last night, and I missed my early morning gym time because of it. And it was worth it, though. It was absolutely worth it. It's so thrilling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I recommend everyone get their hands on this series. The whole series is being reissued, so you don't have to like wait. You can read the first 3, and I think the 4th is going to come out next year or later, but you can get like your hands on all 3 this fall, which is amazing when you don't have to wait between books in a series that's super absorbing.
Yes, I've just added it to my TBR. As soon as you said like wakes up in the body of Jesus, I'm like, done. I'm like,
yeah, but like he's not Jesus. Like he is not Jesus, like at all. He is a very complicated, flawed individual. So if you're looking for moral rectitude, you're gonna have to look elsewhere.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that.
Yes.
What about future projects yourself? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so I have, after this book is released, I have a year of nothing coming out, which is nice from my perspective of the tireless task of promoting one's work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you always have to kind of promote your work unless you want your books to stop selling and be pulped. So there's that. But and then I have a novel coming out, my first novel. It's like I was trying to like just get a whole bunch of like not genres, forms out of the way. There's like nonfiction, then poetry, now I have short fiction, then a novel. And then I have a kids book coming out in the next year. So 2026 is the novel. It's called The Unraveling of Ooh, and it's coming out with Publicist Press, which is another really great small press in Ontario in Canada. And then it's completely narrated by a sock puppet, and it kind of wants its mission is a lot of things. Examining how women uphold the patriarchy, examining again, asking readers to examine what we expect of narratives, because it's entirely narrated by the sock puppet, and the person the puppet is attached to doesn't say anything directly the whole novel. It's asking readers to put their faith in a neurodivergent perspective without assuming that neurodivergent people cannot adequately narrate their whole own lives, and kind of taking that power back. And it's my first book where I really confidently step into a queer space and tell a queer story, because as someone who's married to a cis man but is not straight, I often feel strange about taking up space there. Like I don't belong there. But in this story, I firmly tell a queer story, which is scary and exciting for me at the same time. And then the children's book coming out with Guernica Editions in 2027 is inspired by my son, and it's my son's love of falconry. And I'm working with the wonderful San Antonio artist Katie Powell, who actually did the cover of Widow Fantasies, and she is illustrating the book for me. So I'm very excited about that. And then I'm currently working on finally circling back and doing poems again. So I'm working on a collection of poems that of occasional verse, so verse that celebrates, or not celebrates, that commemorates an occasion, about occasional verse that kind of tackles with how we can celebrate the passing of time, knowing that what time passing means. So it's kind of from my perspective as someone who lives with really debilitating existential OCD, which is a kind of OCD that fixates terrifyingly on questions of mortality and existence. So that's what I'm working on now, but I'm doing it really slowly, and thankfully poetry is incredibly gracious and patient, and I don't feel that mad rush to write that I often feel with other forms. I'm just kind of plucking away at that as I go.
Okay, so one, a sock puppet with a queer story. Yes, please.
Yes.
Like, I cannot wait for that. Two, for your the children's book.
Yes.
The cover of Widow Fantasies is stunning.
Oh, thank you.
That is going to be a beautiful book, like physically beautiful, and then with your words. So I'm so excited for you for that as well. And then I'm excited for you to have another poetry, because I loved your poetry as well.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited about that, and I every time I feel pressured to write, I think about Stephen Heighton. We interviewed him on River Street before he unfortunately passed, and he said something that always sticks with me, is that poetry is always a joy because career-wise, the stakes couldn't be lower. And it sounds so like terrible to say, but it's like, it's true though. Like with the novel, I wrote it in like a year. With Widow Fantasies, I wrote it very quickly, and it was like this. I felt this pressure to like get these stories out, or get this story out, especially with the novel where you're living in this world. And like, again, it's narrated by a sock puppet. I actually made a sock puppet and talked to the sock puppet throughout the year, and it was very strange and absorbing time in my life, and very humiliating and mortifying for my children. They're like, put the puppet away when people come over. So it was a lot. I felt very consumed. Poetry gives me space to breathe. And I'd have to mention that I already have a cover, or at least a cover I'd like to present the publisher with, for The Unraveling of Ooh, which is the sock puppet story. And it is also by Katie Powell. I sent her a picture of my sock puppet, and she created a prototype of it and then painted a portrait of the puppet. I'm a little bit obsessed.
No, this sock puppet must go with you to all your authors' events.
It will.
Right?
She even mailed me along with the portrait. So I have this portrait, I have portraits she painted of all my children. I'm a little bit of a fan of Katie's works. I have a portrait she painted of my children, and then I have a portrait that she painted and mailed me of the puppets.
Yeah.
It's just, it sounds a little bit bananas, but when you see the work, and I hope people fall in love with Ecology Paul, who is the puppet, that's the puppet's name, as much as I did. I mean, it sounds wonky to say I fell in love with a complete, figment of my imagination, but I did.
No, it doesn't sound wonky because readers do it all the time with the characters that writers create. So no, I think it says something for the character that you have fallen in love with someone that you've created. So no.
Thank you.
Okay, Hollay, thank you so much for joining us. This comes out just shortly after your Widow Fantasies is published. And then I think shortly before. So I will shortly, and Rebecca, we will be seeing you in person at the Eden Mills Writers Festival, September 8th in Eden Mills. And we are super excited to see you. I'm so excited to see you here at my favorite festival. I love this. My favorite day of the year.
I love Eden Mills. It's incredible. I was so flabbergasted and just Twitter-pated to be invited. I was, because I'm a publicist, but that invitation had nothing to do with me. It was totally on my amazing publisher for getting me into that.
No, when they released their all the authors for this year's festival, immediately Rebecca and I were texting each other. We're like, oh my God, Hollay's going to be there. We are so excited to see you there.
Well, thank you. I'm also going to be at the Ampersand Festival, which is in Toronto. I'm moderating a panel on writing real life, and I've just started diving into the books that I'm going to be, the books from the authors I'm going to be interviewing, and that's incredible. And I will also be at Wordstock Sudbury on 2 panels. So,
nice.
Yeah.
And when are they? Do you know the dates offhand?
So the Ampersand's on October 5th. It's the weekend of the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I believe. And then Wordstock Sudbury is on November 2nd. And I think it's the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, which is a wonderful event up in Sudbury. And I've never been to Sudbury, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me either. I'm excited for you. So thank you so much, Hollay. I'm so glad that you're in my bookish life. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy reading, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.